You won't believe how easy it is to outmaneuver an avoidant. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a dance with someone who always pulls away just when things start to get real? Like you're building something and suddenly they vanish. Silent, cold, distant. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're dealing with someone who has an avoidant pattern. And guess what? You don't have to play by their rules anymore. Here's the truth no one tells you. Avoidants are not in control. You are. You just haven't tapped into the power you already have. We've been trained to chase connection, to fix, to figure out the why. But what if I told you the real power move is in doing the opposite? You don't need to convince anyone to choose you. You don't need to decode their silence. You need to step back and rise up, because when you shift your energy from chasing to leading, everything changes. Avoidants thrive in the comfort of distance and mystery, but when you stop giving them the stage, the whole play falls apart. They expect you to lean in, so lean out. They expect emotional chaos, so show up with calm clarity. They expect you to beg for breadcrumbs, so feed yourself with certainty, strength, and self-worth. This is not about games. This is about evolution, your evolution. You're not here to chase connection. You're here to command it. With grounded presence, with unshakable boundaries, with the kind of confidence that says, if you can't meet me, I'll walk without you, not in anger, in power. You don't outmaneuver the avoidant by fixing them. You outmaneuver them by becoming undeniably self-led. And when you do that, guess what? They notice, they shift, or they leave. Either way, you win, because this is your life. This is your power. And now you own it. Let's go. When you're caught in a dynamic with an avoidant person, it's easy to get swept into a cycle that feels like emotional quicksand. You reach out, they pull back. You get closer, they shut down. And before you know it, your self-worth is tied to their response. But here's the raw truth. Every time you chase, you hand over your power. Avoidants are wired to withdraw when intimacy feels too close. It's not personal, even though it feels incredibly personal. They've learned to equate closeness with danger and distance with safety. And if you play the role of the pursuer, you're stepping straight into their comfort zone. You're reinforcing the very dynamic that keeps you stuck and them in control. But you're not here to stay stuck. You're here to reclaim your power. When you shift from chasing to leading, everything changes, not just in the dynamic with the avoidant, but within yourself. Chasing is reactive. It's about trying to get something, attention, validation, closeness. Leading is proactive. It's about creating something, stability, clarity, self-respect. Leadership starts when you realize you don't need their approval to validate your worth. You don't need them to say the right words or show up a certain way to feel seen. You get to lead with your energy. You get to decide the standard. When you lead, you don't beg, you don't explain your value, you don't shrink to be accepted, you stand tall and you move forward. And here's the wild part. Avoidants are often drawn to strong energy. Not forceful, not dramatic, but strong, grounded, calm. When you stop feeding the dynamic with anxious pursuit, they don't know what to do. You're not playing the game anymore. You're not reacting to the silence, the pullback, the vague texts, or emotional cold fronts. You're holding your ground like a lighthouse in the storm. The avoidant expects you to chase. That's the script. So when you stop, you disrupt the entire pattern. You send a new message, not just to them, but to yourself. I don't chase what's not available. I lead with presence and purpose. Leading also means having the courage to be misunderstood, to walk away from people who don't have the capacity to meet you, to stop trying to rescue people from their own emotional discomfort. You're not responsible for their wounds, their fears, or their inability to connect. What you are responsible for is how you show up. So start showing up like someone who knows they are worth choosing, like someone who doesn't flinch when silence enters the room, like someone who doesn't spin stories in their head to justify inconsistent behavior. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to fix it. You simply lead by choosing you. That means you speak directly, you express your needs clearly, you stop sugarcoating your truth in hopes they'll stay. Because leading is about alignment, not attachment. When you lead, you don't force people to stay. You allow space for them to rise or to exit. Let them go if they can't meet you. That's not loss, that's leadership. And let's be real. Leading doesn't mean you never feel hurt. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care so deeply about yourself, your peace, your growth, that you won't sacrifice it for breadcrumbs. The energy of leadership is magnetic. It's the energy that says, I'm not waiting for anyone to choose me, I've already chosen myself. And when you live from that space, your entire vibration changes. You stop trying to earn love and you start embodying it. You stop chasing potential and start attracting alignment. So when you're tempted to chase, pause, breathe, step back, ask yourself, what would a leader do right now? Would they double text someone who's pulling away? Would they compromise their needs to avoid being alone? Would they settle for less just to feel something? No. They'd hold their energy, they'd stay grounded, they'd move forward with clarity. And that's what you're here to do. You've spent enough time chasing, now it's time to lead. Avoidants rely on distance like it's oxygen. It's their safe zone, their defense mechanism, the thing they subconsciously use to keep control. And when you start to feel the emotional gap widen, your instinct is to close it, to fix it, to reconnect. That's human. That's love trying to survive. But every time you step in to bridge that distance without being invited, you reinforce the imbalance. You're feeding the very thing that keeps you disempowered. Distance is how the avoidant maintains control. Not always consciously, not always maliciously, but habitually. It's how they create space so they don't have to feel vulnerable, so they don't have to deal with emotions that might overwhelm them or worse, expose them. So they pull back, and you feel it, the change in tone, the slower replies, the unspoken wall that goes up out of nowhere. And your body reacts, panic, confusion, the desire to make it better. That's where the dynamic traps you. Because while you're chasing connection, they're taking refuge in avoidance. While you're reaching out, they're pulling further in. It becomes a one-way dance, where the more you give, the more they retreat. That's where your power drains. That's where your energy gets hijacked. But when you stop feeding the distance, when you no longer chase after their silence or give their withdrawal all your attention, you reclaim control. You turn the focus inward, you shift the entire game. Avoidants are often deeply uncomfortable with intimacy, not because they don't want it, but because they don't know what to do with it. Closeness threatens their internal wiring. So when you get close, they instinctively create space, and when you react by moving in even closer, by pushing, explaining, fixing, pleading, you validate their fear that closeness is suffocating. But what happens when you stop? What happens when instead of running toward them, you stay still? What happens when you meet their distance with presence instead of pursuit? You become unpredictable, uncontrollable, and that's when they start to feel the shift. This isn't about manipulation, it's about rebalancing the dynamic. Because when one person is constantly leaning in, while the other is constantly leaning out, there's no space for real connection. There's just survival. And relationships built on survival don't thrive, they drain. By refusing to feed the distance, you create a silent boundary, a powerful one. You're saying, if you need space, take it, but I'm not going to abandon myself to try and close this gap. That's where your strength lives. That's when you move from reaction to regulation, from fear to leadership. Avoidants often expect you to collapse. They expect you to chase after their withdrawal. But when you don't, when you stay grounded, they're forced to confront something they've been running from, emotional responsibility. And some won't be able to handle that. That's okay. Not everyone is meant to walk beside you. But the ones who can meet you, they'll feel the difference. They'll feel that your calm is not silence, it's stability. That your stillness is not absence, it's presence. That your refusal to chase is not punishment, it's power. You stop feeding the distance by no longer rewarding inconsistency. You stop rewarding passive-aggressive behavior. You stop justifying their inability to connect. You stop trying to decode every shift in mood like your worth depends on it. You stop making their avoidance more important than your peace. You show up fully, authentically, but you don't perform, you don't press, you don't plead, you take your hands off the steering wheel and let the relationship reveal itself. Because sometimes it's not that they're avoidant, it's that they're unavailable. And no amount of effort from you will ever fill that void. So instead of pouring more energy into someone who isn't meeting you, you redirect it. You fill the space they leave behind with self-respect. You use their silence as a mirror for your standards. You let their distance be a teacher, not a trigger. And in doing that, you stop playing the old role, the one where your nervous system does all the work. You start showing up from a place of wholeness, not hunger. And that's the energy that changes everything, because distance can only hold power if you chase it. The moment you stop, it loses control. Confusion is the breeding ground for anxiety. When you're in a dynamic with someone avoidant, you often find yourself living in the gray. Nothing is fully said, nothing is fully known. You're left piecing together clues, analyzing silences, replaying conversations to find the moment where things went off track. It's exhausting. But here's the truth. The confusion only survives where clarity hasn't been claimed. Avoidants are often vague not because they're trying to be manipulative, but because vagueness protects them. It allows them to stay in the relationship without fully committing. It lets them enjoy connection while keeping intimacy at arm's length. It gives them an out at any moment. And if you've been on the receiving end of that, you know how deeply unsettling it is. One minute you feel connected, the next, like you're talking to a stranger. You don't know where you stand, and the not knowing becomes its own form of quiet torment. But here's the shift. Confusion ends when you decide to stop entertaining vagueness. Because clarity isn't just about demanding answers from someone else, it's about getting clear within yourself. What do you want? What are your non-negotiables? What kind of emotional experience are you available for? Clarity is an act of self-leadership. It's the moment you stop dancing around someone else's discomfort and start standing in your own truth. When you're clear, you stop participating in the guessing game. You stop asking, what did I do wrong? And start asking, is this aligned with what I deserve? That one question can flip your entire mindset. Avoidants often avoid hard conversations. They dodge directness because it forces them to confront emotions they don't want to feel. But when you bring clarity to the table, you change the rules. You speak plainly. You ask real questions. You stop tolerating half-truths and emotional limbo. They say things like, I don't know what I want, or let's just see where this goes. And for a while, that seems harmless. But weeks go by, then months, and suddenly you realize you've been holding space for someone who hasn't fully chosen you. Clarity doesn't wait around hoping someone will become ready. Clarity says, this is what I'm looking for. Can you meet me here? And if they can't, that's information, not rejection. That's direction. The moment you get clear is the moment you get free. Free from trying to interpret signals. Free from decoding distant behavior. Free from twisting yourself into emotional shapes just to keep someone from pulling away. And clarity gives you peace even when the answer is hard to hear. Because at least you know. At least you're not stuck hoping for a version of them that only exists in potential. And the truth is, clarity is magnetic. When you know who you are and what you want, the right people feel it. It doesn't scare them, it grounds them. It says, this person isn't here to play emotional hide and seek, they're here to build something real. And those who can't meet you there, they fall away. And that's not a loss, that's a clearing. Avoidants often thrive in chaos. Not loud, dramatic chaos, but subtle chaos, emotional ambiguity, mixed signals, relationships that never quite land. But when you bring clarity, that chaos no longer has a place to hide. You take the mask off the dynamic. You shine a light on the gray. You say, this is what I need. This is how I show up. What about you? And even if they don't answer, even if they disappear, that clarity protects your peace. Most people stay stuck, not because they don't see the truth, but because they're afraid to name it. But you don't need to be afraid of clarity. Clarity doesn't ruin relationships. It reveals them. It either deepens the bond or it highlights the misalignment. Either way, it sets you free. You don't need someone to chase you. You need someone to meet you. And they can't do that if you're dimming your truth to keep them comfortable. You don't need to simplify your needs just to maintain a connection. You need to trust that being clear won't cost you the right person. So the next time you feel confused, don't look outward, look inward. Where have you been unclear? What truth have you been avoiding? What standard have you been softening? Because once you stand in clarity, confusion has nowhere left to live. Boundaries are not walls, they're not ultimatums, they're not threats. Boundaries are declarations. They are self-respect in motion. They are the invisible lines that say, this is what I allow, this is what I won't. And when you're dealing with someone who has avoidant patterns, boundaries aren't optional. They are essential. Avoidants often operate in a way that leaves everything undefined. They blur the lines, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Sometimes affectionate, sometimes distant. Just enough presence to keep you invested, but never enough consistency to feel safe. And when there are no boundaries in place, you end up adjusting yourself to accommodate them. Their pace, their discomfort, their silence, their uncertainty. But here's the truth. Every time you abandon a boundary to keep a connection, you abandon a piece of yourself. People often think boundaries will push others away, especially those who are already avoidant. But the opposite is true. Real boundaries bring real clarity, and clarity reveals truth. The person who can meet you at your boundary is the person capable of meeting you in a relationship. And the one who can't, that's not someone you're losing. That's someone you're finally seeing clearly. Owning your boundaries means you stop asking for permission to honor your needs. You don't need someone else to agree with your standard for it to be valid. You don't need to water yourself down to make sure someone doesn't leave. That's not love, that's fear. And fear is no foundation for anything worth keeping. You teach people how to treat you not by what you say, but by what you allow. If someone consistently crosses a line and you stay without addressing it, without adjusting course, you've silently endorsed that behavior. But when you own your boundaries, you show up like someone who's not negotiating their value. You're not begging for the bare minimum. You're not trying to be easygoing just to avoid confrontation. You are simply standing in the truth of what feels right to your nervous system, your heart, your intuition. Boundaries are about alignment, not control. You're not trying to force anyone to change. You're just saying, this is how I live, this is how I love. Can you meet me here? If they can, great. If they can't, they self-select out, and that's a blessing. Because the longer you let someone dance around your lines, the more you erode your own sense of trust in them and in yourself. And listen, owning your boundaries doesn't always feel good in the moment. It can feel lonely, it can feel cold. You might second guess yourself, especially if the person on the other side reacts with confusion, resistance, or withdrawal. That's normal. Boundaries are often uncomfortable for people who benefited from you not having any, but discomfort isn't danger. It's just the cost of growth, and your peace is worth that price. When you set a boundary, you're saying, I value myself enough not to betray my own needs. And when you enforce it, even when it's hard, you reinforce that message internally. You build trust with yourself. You stop being at the mercy of other people's moods, their avoidance, their indecision. You become the anchor in your own life. Avoidants often operate in ambiguity, and they subconsciously look for people who will stretch themselves thin to close the gap. Don't be that person. Be the one who says, I don't chase connection, I create it. And if it's not mutual, I release it. That kind of self-assuredness changes the whole dynamic. Suddenly you're not reacting to their avoidance, you're responding to your truth. Your boundary might be space, it might be communication, it might be consistency, it might be emotional honesty. Whatever it is, name it, own it, live it. Stop explaining your boundaries like they're unreasonable. They're not. They are the gateway to healthy, reciprocal connection, and if someone disappears when you draw the line, they were never really present to begin with. Better to see that now than to spend years in emotional purgatory trying to make something work that was never built on solid ground. You don't need to be louder, you don't need to be tougher, you just need to be unwavering, calm, certain. You are allowed to say no, you are allowed to leave when your needs aren't being met, you are allowed to stop participating in dynamics that drain you. Your boundaries are your power. And when you own them fully, you stop trying to control outcomes and start creating a life that honors your worth. Attachment to outcome is one of the fastest ways to lose your center. When you're dealing with someone who's emotionally avoidant, it's easy to become obsessed with how things will turn out. Will they commit? Will they change? Will they finally open up? You start scripting conversations in your head, planning your every move based on how you hope they'll respond. But the truth is, the more tightly you grip the outcome, the more you lose control of yourself. And that's where the spiral starts. You become hypervigilant, watching for signs, reading into every word, every delay in a text, every subtle shift in tone. You start living in the future, imagining what might happen, fearing what might not. You sacrifice the present moment for a fantasy of what could be. And without realizing it, your sense of self becomes completely entangled in their choices. But here's the breakthrough. The outcome isn't your responsibility. Your alignment is. When you detach from the outcome, you take your power back. That doesn't mean you stop caring. Doesn't mean you shut down or act indifferent. It means you stay committed to your values and your truth, regardless of how the situation unfolds. You stop tying your peace to whether or not they stay, change, or give you what you want. Because if your peace depends on their behavior, you're handing your emotional well-being to someone who may not even know how to hold their own. Avoidants often give just enough to keep you invested. A flicker of connection here, a vulnerable moment there, and if you're attached to the idea of who they could become, you'll ignore the reality of who they're consistently showing you they are. You'll cling to potential, but potential is a fantasy, one that keeps you stuck, hoping, waiting, shrinking, and life's too short to build a future on a maybe. The power in detachment is this. You no longer need the story to end a certain way for you to feel okay. You can show up fully, love fully, express yourself honestly, and still walk away if it's not serving your highest good. That's not cold. That's strength. That's maturity. That's leadership. You stop trying to win someone over. You stop bending to fit their comfort zone. You start showing up as someone who isn't afraid to let go of what isn't aligned. Because what's meant for you will never require you to betray yourself to keep it. When you detach from the outcome, you start seeing more clearly. You start recognizing red flags for what they are, not as puzzles to be solved. You stop overanalyzing their behavior and start getting curious about your own. Why do I feel triggered? Why do I want to fix this? Why does their withdrawal make me chase? That's where the real growth happens. You get out of reaction mode and back into awareness. You learn to sit with discomfort without trying to solve it through someone else. You learn to trust that if something falls apart, it's making space for something better. And most importantly, you learn that your value doesn't fluctuate based on how someone else shows up. You can still care, you can still love, but you love from a place of wholeness, not dependency. You offer connection, but you don't force it. You stay open, but you don't abandon yourself. That's what detachment looks like in practice, being fully present, fully expressive, and still completely okay with whatever happens next. And ironically, when you detach from the outcome, you often create the very space that allows the relationship to evolve, if it's meant to. Your calm becomes magnetic, your energy feels different, you're not trying to control, you're not reacting to every move. You're simply rooted in yourself, and people feel that. Avoidants especially feel that, and they either rise to meet you or they remove themselves. And either way, you win. Detachment is not giving up, it's leveling up. It's saying, I trust life enough to let go of control. It's releasing the illusion that you can force timing, readiness, or transformation in another person. And it's realizing you don't need a specific outcome to validate your worth. You're not here to chase closure. You're here to become so grounded in who you are that nothing, no silence, no withdrawal, no inconsistency can shake your sense of self. That's what it means to truly regain control. And it all begins the moment you let go of needing it to go a certain way. There comes a moment when you realize you spent more time trying to understand someone else's behavior than honoring your own. That moment hits hard because it's where your truth confronts your pattern. When you've been in a dynamic with someone who's avoidant, it's incredibly easy to fall into the fixer role. You think if you can just be more patient, more loving, more understanding, they'll finally feel safe enough to open up. You start carrying the emotional weight of two people, believing your effort can bridge the gap. But let's be real. How long have you been doing that? How long have you been stretching yourself thin, managing their moods, tiptoeing around their triggers, taking responsibility for keeping the connection alive? That's not love. That's emotional labor. And at some point, it's time to ask the question, what would happen if I put all that energy back into me? Because that's the shift that changes everything. Avoidants often struggle with vulnerability. They pull back when things get real. And if you're an empathetic, emotionally available person, you're probably wired to lean in, to soothe, to fix, to prove your love. But that pattern becomes a trap. The more you try to fix them, the more you disconnect from yourself. You begin to internalize their inability to connect as a reflection of your worth. You make their distance about your deficiency. And that's how you lose yourself in the process of trying to save someone who never asked to be saved. Empowerment begins the moment you stop trying to fix them and start focusing on you. You don't need to analyze their childhood wounds to justify why they can't communicate. You don't need to make excuses for their inconsistent behavior. You don't need to keep lowering your standards in the name of compassion. That's not strength, that's self-abandonment. True power comes from turning inward, from asking, why do I keep choosing people who can't meet me? What part of me believes I have to earn love by being endlessly patient, endlessly understanding? This isn't about blame, this is about responsibility. You can't change them. You were never supposed to. That was never your job. But you can change the pattern within you that keeps attracting and tolerating emotional unavailability. Start pouring your energy back into your own healing, into your voice, your values, your emotional standards. You've spent so much time trying to decode them. Try decoding you. What do you need to feel safe, seen, held? And where in your life are you settling for less than that, hoping someone will eventually rise to the occasion? When you shift the focus back to yourself, you start making decisions from clarity, not from fear. You stop negotiating your worth just to maintain connection. You begin to live like someone who knows they're worthy of being chosen without having to earn it through performance or perfection. That's what empowerment looks like. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, it's not cold. It's steady, quiet, certain. And here's the beautiful part. The more you empower yourself, the less you need anyone else to change. The more peace you cultivate within, the less chaos you tolerate outside of you. You stop needing them to show up differently because you start showing up differently for yourself. You start attracting new dynamics, not because people have changed, but because you have. Fixing someone else always puts you in a powerless position. It keeps your happiness dependent on their evolution. But empowerment brings you back to center. It reminds you that you're not here to carry someone else's emotional avoidance. You're here to walk your path with integrity, with strength, with emotional maturity, and to call in relationships that meet you there. And yes, it might mean letting go of the version of the relationship you wanted to work. It might mean grieving the fantasy. But in return, you get you back, your joy, your clarity, your peace. That's a trade worth making every time. So stop asking what more you can do to make them feel safe. Start asking what you can do to make yourself feel seen. You're not here to be a mirror for someone's avoidance. You're here to reflect your own worth so clearly that anyone not ready to meet it fades into the background. You're not the fixer, you're the force. And the moment you shift that focus, the whole story changes. So here's the truth. Outmaneuvering an avoidant isn't about games or tactics. It's about rising into your power, getting crystal clear on your worth, and refusing to shrink to fit someone else's limitations. When you shift the focus inward, set bold boundaries, and let go of chasing outcomes, you stop trying to fix anyone and start choosing yourself. That's where real freedom begins. Thank you for showing up for your growth today. Keep choosing the version of you that no longer settles for emotional breadcrumbs. You're not just worthy of love, you're worthy of reciprocal love. Keep rising.